winging it.
So yes.
After a little while, maybe wait another few minutes for until 7:05, say, and then I'll have a few announcements and then we can go.
Very good.
Isn't anybody seeing any birds? Ruddy ducks in Maryland. Oh, that's Evan Power. I know that.
Oh, Karen is back on. There's
yeah,
Karen.
Great.
And with her muse, the purple gallinule at her ear.
So you got the meeting started.
Yes, we did. Welcome.
Good.
I just want to say one thing about EP. We're seeing ruddy ducks in Maryland. Evan Powers is the grandson of Don and Karen Schneider, and he and his girlfriend have organized an Audubon chapter in the University of Maryland. And they just had a sign up over the weekend, and they signed up 63 students to be part of the Audubon. Well done, Evan. Wow. Excellent.
So Robert Stecker says he saw a pair of gold eyes at Bobby Jones. Do you mean golden? Can you be a little, can you explain more what you mean by gold eyes? Do you mean ducks? Please.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, there's Evan Power.
No, that was somebody else. Robert Stecker. Evan said thank you for the support because I just announced what he was doing. Yeah. Okay.
And Robert Stecker saw a pair of gold eyes, but I'm not sure exactly what he meant. Ducks, maybe. Yeah. But that would be really great to go. That would be a rare duck for this area.
Yeah, sure would. Oh, meadowlarks at Rothenbach. Oh, nice. Very nice. That's Linda. Hi, Linda.
Many robins, and where somebody's reporting in from Ohio, Oberlin.
Lene Owens, yeah, Lene Owens, that's great, and Conrad. Okay.
Cool. We don't have purple finches here.
No.
Lene, I'm really jealous. You should send a few down here as long as you don't endanger them. Hello from snowbirds here in Sarasota from Waterville, Maine. Oh, yes. You've got some. Noah's in Maine, so we're representing the East Coast and into Ohio. Spoonbills at the uplands.
Oh, nice.
Good. I don't know where the uplands are, but
no, I don't either.
It's at the county line on the water.
Oh, is that right? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Okay, so Karen, you're back. You want to sort of take over and give people your tips?
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm glad the meeting was going. I had to make myself a panelist and get in that way once I got on the internet again. So technical difficulties hopefully over. I will share my slides and just the usual. This is a webinar and now, where's my slideshow now?
It's up, Karen.
I see it. I'm just looking for the right. Oh, there it is. Slideshow, play from start. I had to restart my computer.
Okay.
So, this is a webinar. So you will see the panelists, and I don't think we told Noah. We all turn our monitors off, so you'll be the only one on screen when you are talking. If you have questions for the speaker, please put it in the Q&A. It makes it easier for us to follow up with. If you have questions about anything else, put it in the chat. But be rest assured that no matter where you put it, we will find your questions and they will get asked at the end to Dr. Charney. So I think that's it. We had one other, I don't know how much you went over, Jean.
Yeah, so I can go to that one.
Okay, so we'll start the meeting.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Jean Doobie here. Sad news, John Ginnivan passed away last week. And for anybody who knew him, he was an inspiration. He was an incredible birder, great sense of humor, a wonderful, wonderful person. I've known him for a long, long time, and I'll miss him terribly. And we all will. His dear wife, Teresa Ginnivan, and friend Stu Wilson have set up a fund, the John Ginnivan Educational Fund, and we've already received quite a number of donations to that fund. Stu, Teresa, and Kathy Doddridge are on a committee who will determine how the money will be spent. It'll be, people can apply, residents of Sarasota and Manatee County. I don't know too much of the parameters yet, but if you look on our website, you could look at the fund, and you could also click on to Stu Wilson's email address to get more information. And as they develop the parameters for the fund, we will put those on the website as well. So, John, we miss you. And it's a sad loss for Audubon and a sad loss for birds. So I don't know what else to say. The other thing, well, we know we have this wonderful speaker tonight. Just one other thing, I'm going to look right into the camera and say, have you paid your membership dues yet? Many of you have, but many of you have not. So we're still looking for people to, we are still several $1,000s short in our membership drive. So please, we do a lot at our Audubon, and this helps us keep going. So don't forget, you can pay on the website, or you can send in a check. Let's see, I think that's it for now. And now we can go to your next slide, and there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Go ahead, Margie.
do you want to do this now, or you want to do this?
No, I will stop sharing. I just wanted folks to know, and I'll put this back up.
Well, maybe since you have it up, we should just say that our wonderful speaker is offering through Yale University Press, who published this great book with fabulous reviews. They're offering a special 30% off to the book. If you buy it through Yale Press, you need to go directly to Yale Press and use the code that's up here. It's also, I think, on the Audubon website.
It's in the e-blast I sent yesterday. So,
okay. And if you have trouble, contact me or
me, either one. Editor.
Millie, so that but you need to go through Yale University to get the discount, which is really a terrific discount.
Yeah. So yeah, if you go to this website, there are multiple choices at the top. Make sure you press Yale, and then you will get to, and use this code NCTREE 0224. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so we can get to the speaker.
Congratulations, Noah, on that book. It's wonderful. I hope you sell 1 million copies.
Really fun.
Well, I'm halfway through it and really enjoying it. So we'll
It's a great
love it
book.
after today.
All righty, so shall I take it away?
Yes.
So Noah, this is embarrassing, but can you pronounce your last name? Because I want to make sure we're pronouncing it right.
Yeah, it's Charney. Actually,
Charney?
in Russian. Yeah.
Okay, great. So it's my pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Noah Charney and his book, These Trees Tell a Story, The Art of Reading Landscapes. So Dr. Charney is a professor of conservation biology at the University of Maine, and he'll talk about his fascinating and critically acclaimed new book. And it's published, as you've already probably heard, by Yale University Press. So Dr. Charney does all kinds of cool things, including you play jazz, right? Or you compose jazz?
I run a jazz club, but yeah.
You run a jazz club in addition to everything else you do.
Part owner.
So he uses the tools of spatial ecology to guide conservation of sensitive species and ecosystems in the face of global change and expanding human populations. We sure need that down here. Recent projects include the modeling impacts of climate change on the Galapagos plants and tortoises, and forecasting and mapping future tree growth around North America. Let's see. And Untangling the Ecology, Evolution, and Management Challenges of Unisex Salamanders, and Landscape Ecology and Conservation of Vernal Pool Amphibians and Many Other Taxa in a Variety of Settings. In other words, if it's all about animals and amphibians and reptiles or whatever, we're looking at a complete landscape, and he's the one who really looks at the whole big picture, even in terms of eons of history, right? And he's also the executive director of a nonprofit in Nashville, Tennessee, where I understand your family is from originally, and maybe where you have your jazz club. I don't know for sure. So Dr. Charney works to transform how conservation planning is approached within the urban environment. And he has a previous book, as well as many scholarly papers, scholarly papers, but his previous book is, he co-authored on an insect guide and insect tracking with 2 national awards. He completed his dissertation in organismic and evolutionary biology in 2010. Did I pronounce it right?
No, it's not. It's the name of the department, but it's not a real word. So,
Well, it sounds cool. It sounds very sophisticated.
yeah.
He got his PhD in evolutionary biology at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And between obtaining his PhD and joining the faculty of Maine in 2021, he worked at Harvard Forest as a Charles Bullard Fellow for Harvard University, a researcher at University of Arizona, and a collaborator with Galapagos Conservancy, as well as taking care of your 2 boys, right?
Yep.
So I'm thrilled to have you come. I think we all realize the more we're out birding, or even if we're not birding, if we're walking around and in our backyards or wondering what we're looking at, we all need to be far more aware of our habitat and how to conserve it, protect it. So I'm thrilled. Dr. Charney will talk, as I understand it, about Maine, and a lot of us are from the north to begin with, but I think it's very clear that what you're going to talk to us about is applicable to all of us and all of our relevant landscapes. So please, Dr. Charney, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The screen sharing right here. You can stop me if something doesn't look right. Thanks for that great introduction. On my last name, funny story, there's another Noah Charney you may have seen who's actually more famous and wrote a book on art theft, and is this expert novelist and art historian, and we actually did a joint webinar last week that you can look up online. That's really funny. The 2 of us kind of look alike, and we're talking about our 2 books, and you can see that if you want. But he also has the same name, probably came from a similar background, born one day apart from me. It's really great to be here, and you can see the picture of the book, and you can see me and hear everything, right? So so thanks for having me. And it sounds like a really listening into all the cool natural history that your group is interested in and looking at and sharing with each other. It's such an important thing that you do and that everyone out there is doing. And so I'm really grateful that you're there holding this space for everyone and all your members to be part of, and that you've invited me to share a little bit of my stories, which are, from my perspective. I'm gonna be, as they said, talking about this book. I'm glad you shared that code. If you need help getting to that code to get the extra 30% off, that would be, I can help you out with that too. From the press, they just told me about that yesterday, or a couple days ago. All right, so I'm going to tell a few stories from the book. I think I'll start here. When I was researching the book, this landscape in Tennessee that I went down to, and this is a friend's farm. And I went and visited this land, and he took me around. I had my 2 kids and 2 boys. They're in the double stroller at the time, and we were looking at his property, and he was, managing it for wildlife. And he's an expert naturalist, and he has lots of trail cameras that he had up. And we went out checking his cameras. He's been managing burning for birds there, actually. and for habitat for the birds. And we went through his soybean fields and sort of went down to the river and found some raccoon tracks along the river. We went up to the edge of that forest, and the field they were going along these like wide dirt, sort of wide enough for him to drive his pickup down, kind of farm roads. And I'm pushing the double stroller, and he's up ahead, and we'd been checking the wildlife cameras, but he's at this point he's like 30 feet or more up ahead at this trail intersection by the edge of the forest, and he calls back to me and says, hey Noah, I found a scat here. I want you to look at it, because he knows that I like poop and stuff. And so and he calls back to me, he's like, hey, I think it's a raccoon scat, because he had seen it the day before. He'd taken a picture of it, and he'd like taken it home, looked it up on Google Images, and was sort of like, yeah, that kind of raccoon kind of looks like the scat I have here. They're both sort of brown and poopy looking, more specific than that. But I'm back there behind the double stroller with the two kids, and I can't see the thing. It's 30 feet away, but I know it's not a raccoon scat. Certainly a raccoon may have walked there. The raccoon we saw tracks in the mud earlier that day, probably could have walked past there. But the thing is, a raccoon would put her scat like on the uphill side of a tree down by the creek. They have very specific or some sort of latrine like that. This spot in the middle of a trail, in a trail intersection on the edge of a forest and a field, isn't the kind of place a raccoon would put her scat. And so, although John's an excellent naturalist and knows a lot about all sorts of things, the mistake he made here when identifying a scat, you don't start by looking at the thing itself. You start by looking at the context, at the environmental context. Where is it in space, and what is this place telling you about it? Sue Morris, this tracker, has this maxim that she says that half of tracking is knowing where to look, the other half is looking there. Nowhere in that does it figure in like, what does the thing look like? It's all about sort of like, where are you in space and what's around you? And in this case, I couldn't see the scat, but I'm like 90% sure from where I was standing that it's going to be a coyote scat, just because that's the place the coyote would mark its territory. And it's right in the middle of a trail. That's sort of how they place their scats. And, every animal has their distinct way of marking territory. So, when we got up to it, it was in fact a coyote scat, a little weird because they'd been eating apples, so it got a little mushy and stuff like that. But that's what it is. So a lot of what I think about is context and ecological context, and thinking beyond like the narrow thing you're looking at, but of the whole like spatial world around you and the different levels of ecology that are interacting. I want to talk a little bit about this nonprofit in Nashville, where since 2006 or so is when I started this. It's sort of a series of nonprofits, but we've been involved with a lot of other groups, and we've just sort of been one piece of this whole thing. But here's a map of the city of Nashville, which is one of the largest land area cities in the country. And I might get the statistic wrong, but it's something like 250 square miles of closed canopy forest within the metro limits. So there's a lot to sort of be concerned about and to protect there. And so we were, mapping core conservation areas. And I hope you can see my mouse here where I'm pointing. Stop me if you can't see it. And not only the areas that are important to protect, but also linking corridors between them, and how we're going to sort of conserve land along these spaces. And so this official open space plan, which was developed by a lot of partner organizations, it was officially adopted by the Metro Council and is officially part of the sort of policy in some sense, or guiding document of the city. So I want to zoom in on Richland Creek, which is this thing right here. This is Richland Creek, and this right here is what I call the Neato Bridgeway. It's a neato little bridgeway. When I was a kid, my mom would sort of be driving me home from school. We'd come down this road here, and we used to be able to turn over this, and I'd say, take the Neato Bridgeway, and we'd go over here. You can't do this anymore. You can see the road doesn't connect. They made it a dead-end road, but this is a railroad. You used to be able to drive over the railroad to the bridge there, where she'd stop the car and tell me to get out and look over the bridge and see how many turtles I could count. And so from that Neato Bridgeway, I could count often dozens of turtles. Here we've got soft-shelled turtles, box turtles, map turtles, a lot of turtles that actually today are on the official list of those in greatest need of conservation in the state of Tennessee. There are a lot of green herons, blue herons, all sorts of wildlife it's one of my sort of favorite wildlife viewing spots ever. So a few years ago, I went to take my kids back to experience this sacred part of my childhood. We drive up to the road that leads to the Nido Bridgeway, and we find this sign. And I was like, what do you mean road closed? This is a public road. How come I can't go there? And I did a little digging, and it turns out that the city of Nashville had literally given this road away for free to the abutting landowners. And this had gone through 5 different committees, 3 readings of council, and this was a 2-stage process. So it went through all of those readings and council committee meetings twice, so once in each year. So it was like 10 different committee meetings and 6 different readings of council. And apparently nowhere along the way did anybody sort of raise their hand and say like, wait a minute, this isn't a good idea. You know, here we've got a mapped corridor on the part of the, you know, part of the open space plan. We've got conservationists fighting tooth and nail to protect spaces like this, and we own this road, and we're just going to give it away. And from my perspective, you know, I think what happened was, and the people making these decisions are fine people. Some of them actually work as part of our nonprofit and are well-intentioned. The problem is that they're looking at maps that look like this. This is a black and white plat map that, you know, has, it maps on it things like traffic flow, right? And remember how this is now a dead end road? From a traffic perspective, this road sort of has no value, right? Because there's no traffic flow. So sure, give it away. Why not? So obviously what's missing here is the ecological context. What is around here? What are the conservation concerns? And that is what's not mapped on these sort of black and white plat maps. Now I'm seeing a message here that maybe there's something wrong with the view here. Is that still true?
No, there's a peg square lower right. Somebody sent some face onto your program and it put a block into it. Do you know?
You,
I don't know if it's from you or someone else. It's
lower right, a square?
yes.
I could stop sharing and reshare. Should I do that?
No, but somebody had sent some bubble face and it seemed to carry that opaque square onto the program.
I see a yes reshare. I'll just stop and reshare, okay? It'll take me a second.
Yeah, I think that'll.
All right. I just seen. Feel free to interrupt at any point if something else comes up. I'm not offended. Are you? Let's see. I think that. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
Do you still see the blue square?
Yes.
All right. Let me try one more thing.
Showed up on your computer screen when you were. Yeah. Let's try it that way.
Square gone?
Now it's gone.
No, well, we don't know because somebody put a blue bubble face.
Is the blue bubble still there?
Yeah.
It is.
That's really
Very odd. I don't know why it's there.
I'm not sure it was you. It may
It's on
be.
it's showing up on his on your when we see your screen and we see just the
Let me try a different way of doing it. Let's see. Do you see it? Let's see. How about if I do it this way? You see it?
Yeah, now it's in the middle.
Worse.
Now there's another one.
Oh, Zoom.
That's very odd.
There, it
went
left.
away. Whatever you
gone?
did, it went away. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll try not to do anything else. Well, let me jump in if something else comes up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. So we got the people that are making decisions that are based on these sort of maps and that don't have a full awareness. And we have people, decision makers, that just don't have a real connection to the space and to the landscape that they're managing. And increasingly, that's sort of all of us. For my dissertation work, I went to, there was something like 1,000 vernal pools in my dissertation. I think I went to 500 of them. I was going all over the Berkshires to all these different ponds, and there were all these wonderful places in my memory of these beautiful ponds and interesting sculptures and things that are really bizarre that I'd love to go back to. And every time I go back to the Berkshires, I sort of remember some of these places and I recognize places. But the problem is the whole time I was going, I was following a GPS, and this was sort of right at the beginning of when we started moving from using paper maps as how I grew up navigating to like letting a computer guide us around. And I realized that when I was following this GPS to all of my 500 pools that I was going to, I just sort of follow it to 10 ponds a day, and I wouldn't be thinking about where I'm going. And I never did the work of building that map in my head of like, how are these things connected to each other in space? And how do I get from one to another? I just let the computer do that for me. So I never had to do that work. So now when I go back, it's just a big blur. It's a jumble. I don't know how these ponds relate to each other. When we go out and we want to go from one place to the other, we no longer can really get there unless we have a computer telling us where to turn and when, I think. And we no longer really have that spatial awareness as we let machines guide us around spatially, as we let computers identify species for us, like if anyone's used Seek. Or, with ChatGPT and AI, we can increasingly just like let them write papers for us and do all sorts of stuff. And these tools are really useful and really incredibly helpful. I use them a lot. And they're also sort of terrifying. Because, what I feel like these tools do is they get in between us and nature. And what the bots can't do is replace our connection to the natural world. When I was about 10 years ago now, I had this job where I was teaching this course. It was my favorite job I ever had, I think. And this course, we would go out once a week in a van and take my students out to a landscape, and there'd be a mystery, and they'd have to read the story of the landscape and connect with this place. And this is the basis of the book that I've written. We follow these class around to the different sites. So what do I mean when I say read a landscape? It's about looking at patterns and seeing what story those patterns tell. So I'll show you a couple patterns here and to show you, for example. So here's my backyard. Hopefully you can see a video. Stop me if you can't. So one pattern in this yard is that there are hemlocks throughout the understory, but there are no hemlocks in the canopy. And that pattern tells a story. I'll get back to it in a second. Another pattern I just want to tell you is if you dig a hole anywhere in our yard, it just keeps going through this nice soft soil that our garden loves, but you can't find any rocks. There are no rocks in our yard. But if you take a walk up the hill behind our house, within about 20 seconds, you start passing lots and lots of rocks. There are rocks everywhere. You can't avoid rocks. They're the footprints of the glaciers. When the glaciers melted, 10,000 years ago, they left rocks all across the north. That's why farmers had to haul them out of their fields and line their fields with stone walls. So why aren't there rocks in our yard? Well, when the glaciers melted in this region, they left behind this giant glacial lake, where for thousands of years, lake bottom sediment built up layer after layer, burying those rocks. So we sit up on top of this hill looking out across, imagining we're still looking across the big glacial lake, and we imagine that, our house is still beachfront property from the lake that's been gone for 10,000 years. And, when you look at those stone walls, you notice there's not a lot of really small rocks, which tells you that this is not cropland, this is sheep pasture. And I would have done the same thing, keep the crops down in our yard where there's that nice lake bottom sediment. That's where we grow our garden, right? And then up here, you keep the sheep. Up here, it's this sort of rocky, acidic soil where there's, pines and partridge berry. Up here, there's actually that same pattern that is down in our front yard, which is there are lots of hemlocks in the understory and no hemlocks in the canopy. So this is the classic story of forest succession. When the sheep pasture was abandoned, the winged pine seeds flew out across the field, and the pines grew up straight and tall, and the pines love the sun. But the thing about pines is they can't grow in the shade of their own canopy. Hemlocks, on the other hand, they love the shade and they're slow growing. So they sit in the understory, waiting for the pines to die, waiting to turn this into a hemlock forest. And then there's this middle layer of small birches next to these cut stumps that tell us, a couple decades ago, someone cut some of the pines, making gaps in the canopy where the birches love to grow. So these layers in the soil and the forest, they tell us about the past, they tell us about the future, they tell us, where to plant your garden, where to find the bobcats and fishers and porcupines And, you know, I think if we all had this level of awareness and understanding of the landscapes that we're managing, I think we'd make better decisions, be better able to steward our land. And I find it to be a really compelling way to connect with nature and just to sort of tell stories about, you know, what is this place and where is our place in it? So go ahead and stop me if you have any trouble, but I'm assuming you can still see. You've heard about sort of the wild yard approach. You know, what we do in our yard has a huge effect on the ecology and on ourselves and all sorts of things. This is our yard here and our neighbor's yard there. You know, we take a wild yard approach to things. We let it grow pretty wild, and we don't rake up our leaves because, you know, the leaves, are where the bugs overwinter up in the north. And so if we were to rake them away, burn them, or throw them in the garbage, we'd literally be burning all our pollinators because that's where they overwinter. You know, all the little critters that live in the leaves, the leaf miners. And I just, as a side note, I'm very into these little critters from this other book that was mentioned before. They make these beautiful patterns in architecture that if you really want to get into, and you can just find all these things on. We used to do this talk where we'd go, and every time we'd give the talk, we'd start with 10 minutes of all the beautiful patterns on the door of the building we were talking in, Charlie and I. So I encourage you to get out and just look real close up around you. But these creatures mainly live on native plants, right? The non-native plants host fewer bugs because they left them all behind in wherever they came from, the other continents. So Desiree Narango did this nice study where she was looking at neighborhoods that had non-native plantings. And in those neighborhoods with more non-native shrubs, she found that there weren't enough bugs, so the chickadee mamas couldn't find enough food to feed the babies, and the babies pretty much all starved to death before they were able to fledge. So, you know, the choices we make in our yard have these rippling effects. A classic example of this is in Phoenix, Arizona. It's this desert landscape, and you have these different potential ways of managing your yard, either in a wild xeric landscape, a sort of managed xeric landscape. There's this barren lots, and there's a sort of ways where people try to make Arizona look like Baltimore with the things they plant. And some of this has to do with economic and social inequalities, and some of it are choices. And all this obviously affects the plants, but then Susanna Lerman did the study where she found that this also rippled out to the birds, and in the neighborhoods that had xeric landscaping, you saw the xeric loving native desert bird species, and in the landscapes that were, or the yards that were not landscaped this way, you saw the sort of cosmopolitan sort of pest birds that people, in fact, in those neighborhoods, when Susanna would ask them about birds, they'd be like, oh, you're a birder? How can we get rid of our birds? We hate birds. They're always pooping on us. And in the other neighborhoods, people would always be like, oh, I love our birds. We love our birds so much. These nice bird runners and all these things. So what we do in our yard influences the bird communities, which then feeds back to how we feel about the landscape itself. So, you know, we know all these things about how planting non-natives is bad, and it's good to use native species, and sort of invasives have really changed our landscapes. For one chapter in my book, I was looking at this abandoned orchard, and I was going for a whole winter trying to take pictures of every species that lived in it for this chapter of the book. And it's one of these sort of invasive hellholes, right? It's just like privet and bittersweet and multiflora rose. It's just a tangled, nasty thicket. And it's got all the things that are like on the worst noxious species list for the Northeast anyway. And the whole winter there was this cleanup effort going on by the grounds crew trying to get rid of the privet and the bittersweet and clean it up, make it nicer and prettier. And this whole winter, I wondered if mine was the only heart that sort of broke watching this cleanup effort, because, you know, the orchard is a place that lives really deep in me. I've spent a lot of time there for 11 winters. My friend Charlie Eisman, who wrote that insect book with me, we taught this winter tracking course, and we would always start in the orchard for one particular species that we were after. when you go into the orchard, you find what we call rabbitat. This is this dense multiflora rose thickets, and the rabbits love to sit there and eat them all winter. And this is eastern cottontail. It's imported from the Midwest. It would have replaced our New England cottontail, which was historically our local bunny. And then above the bunny rabbitat there, you've got all these thick berries that feed the birds throughout winter. And you get sort of flocks of robins and other species that hang out there eating the berries. And I remember this one time Charlie was there and we were teaching this class, and he was actually talking about bird language, which is this idea that if you listen to the birds, they'll tell you things about what's going on in the world. And as birders, you probably all know this. At the time he was saying this, there was this cacophony of robins, like just this loud, like chattering that he was talking over, and all of a sudden they all went quiet, and this hush fell over the orchard, and we waited. And a minute later, this Cooper's hawk comes flying low over us, and we're like, aha, that's what the birds were telling us. So the berries, they feed the little birds and the bunnies, and those feed the bigger birds and the predators. And I was out there trying to get pictures with my trail cam of the predators. And on Christmas Day, it snowed, about, I don't know, 8 inches or so. And I went out there with my son Juno to check our trail camera. And the snow was too deep for his little legs. He was probably about 4 or so at the time. And so I had to sort of post hole make the holes in the snow so that he could step in my tracks behind me. The way, like coyotes will do, if they'll take their rear feet and direct register step into their front feet to sort of save energy. And in fact, sometimes if you're following a coyote trail, you'll find what you thought was one coyote will branch out, and it turns out it was 3 coyotes all stepping in each other's tracks. So Juno looks up to me and says, "Dada, you and me, we're coyotes." And I'm like, yeah. And so we get up to the trail cam, and I put my laptop down in the snow and take the SD card out and put it in my computer, hoping to sort of, well, we thought we'd see a picture of me and Juno walking up to the trail cam, right? But we don't. What we see is this picture. And on some level, we believe that we truly transformed into that coyote, and we howled the whole way back to the car. So eastern coyote, it's a modern invention. 100 years ago, it didn't exist. It replaced the wolves that we killed off, and it was western coyotes that moved east and interbred with wolves along the way, got bigger and more pack-like. We got pictures there of red foxes, also mainly imported for fox hunting, at least in the southern part of the US. And we got pictures of gray fox, which is a nice fully native species there. When Charlie and I were teaching this tracking course, we'd be out in the deep woods of Western Mass, which has, a lot of great old forest. And every couple of days when we're out there, we would come across the trail of a bobcat. And we'd be like, that's our favorite species. Let's follow it. So we'd get on the trail and we'd follow that cat through the woods. And inevitably, it would lead us to some horrible thicket, some like old beaver dam or some recent logging cut, someplace like thick with like brambles with lots of bunnies for the bobcat to eat. It'd be someplace like the orchard. And it's really bobcat is the reason that we always started our tracking class in the orchard, because, it's the one place we could always go and always find bobcat sign, because it's like the densest population of bobcats we've ever seen. And maybe it's not actually a lot of different cats. It may be just this one family of cats that we've been following for 20 years. It's just that they have no reason to go anywhere else because they have everything they need right there. They've got cover and they've got lots of bunnies. So they just sort of hang out there. So when you look at the orchard, maybe you see a tangled mess of invasives, or maybe you see the bobcats that you have a relationship with and that you've been following for 20 years. A mile away from the orchard, there's this famous salamander crossing spot where I don't know if you know about the big salamander migrations that happen in the Northeast, but on the first warm rainy night after the spring, the salamanders that you basically can never see because they're deep underground come out, and they're really big, and they all migrate across the roads down to their breeding wetlands. And there's a bunch of different species, but spotted salamanders are the one that folks are really excited about. And there's this famous crossing where the kids come out and help the salamanders across the road so they don't get squished. And the thing is, it's not that spotted salamanders are really rare. There's probably over 30,000 populations of them in the state of Massachusetts alone. And, you know, we're on the way there. We might be squishing other salamanders on the way. I don't know. It's not like we're necessarily helping this species as a whole that much. But what to me is really powerful about this is it's this community event where an individual child is holding a salamander in her hand and making a connection and seeing that creature and feeling that relationship. And that to me is what's so powerful. And that's what, you know, all of this is about, is these individual relationships with organisms and with places. And that's to me what was so powerful about that course I taught, was, you know, students finding connection and relationship with nature. So in that class and in the book, you know, we go to all these different sites, and we go and tell the whole story of the whole valley throughout each of the sites we go to. And I'm trying to decide how I want to play this, because usually I do an interactive thing. Right now it's a little hard in a webinar setting. So this is one of the puzzles in the book, and in the first place I would take the students to. And if you're able to chat and type into the chat what you see here, what patterns you might think are the puzzle you need to solve, you can go ahead and chat and type them in as I talk. But, you know, you look at this landscape and you ask, you know, what is a pattern here that's a story that needs to be told? Like, do you see any differences or any colors? If you were to look at this as my doppelganger Noah Charney, who's an artist and looks at paintings and tries to read the clues in a painting, like, what would you see if you were to paint this? Well, one pattern that I see, and the one I want to point out, is, you know, the difference. That's right. Someone has it there. The difference between the slopes. There's the dark green here and the light green here, right? So when you go into a landscape, you start with sort of this blank slate. You don't have to know anything. You just kind of look at the visual patterns. How do you paint this landscape? And what are the things you notice? And then after you look at that, you can start to think about, like, what could have caused that. And anyone could sort of think for yourself or put it in the chat or however you want to do it. What kind of things could cause that pattern? And as you think about that, you start to look more closely, and you look at the different species that you see there. And the same way my friend the Noah Charney looks at the icons and, like, Christian icons and what they mean about what was going on with the saints at the time. For us, you look at the different species and they tell you about the habitat. And you can look at all these species that are on this side and the ones that are this side, and then you can think about things you know from experiencing them in other places or reading in a book, field guide or whatever, about the habitat preferences of those different species. So, and I see somebody mentioning direction of sun, and that seems like a really, really good insight there. And as you think about why direction of sun would cause this pattern, you might have some thoughts about what that means, and it might put together with you know, the fact that there are moist plants, loving plants over here, and dry loving plants over here. So now you look down here at the compass, right? And we're in the northern hemisphere. So this south points south, and so in the northern hemisphere, the sun is always in, at least when we're above the tropic of whichever tropic of Cancer, is that right? The sun is always in the southern part of the sky. So all day long, the sun beats down from the south and beats down on this slope and makes it hot and dry. And then you look at these plants and you say, wait, these are the moist loving plants. And then, wait, the sun is in the south and the dry loving plants are, wait a second, did I say the south is this way? Shouldn't that be the other way? And you get real confused and you say, this must be completely wrong. So that must not explain it. So there's something else that the plants are telling us. And which means we need to look at other things that drive plant patterns. And if you have other ideas for what drive plant patterns, you can put that in the text or think about it for a second. I drink some water. And so when, yeah, steepness of the slope, it's a good guess. Another thing I'll say here is down here, I put some clues, these rocks here. And if anyone knows anything about geology, these ones you see have this really sharp breaking corners on it. Yep, I see someone's got basalt and a sedimentary rock. So this is like a sandstone. It's an arcosic sandstone. And basalt, if you know, oh, you don't see any rocks. These down here. Well, somebody sees some rocks. Well, I think somebody sees rocks. You can jump in if you don't. Basalt is an ancient lava flow, and it is. If anyone's been to Iceland or other places or where you see basalt cliffs like the Palisades in New York, 200 million years ago, North America and different people are seeing different things, it seems like. But I'm going to finish the story, no matter what you're seeing. So you know how North America and Africa keep kind of bumping into each other and splitting apart again. The last time North America and Africa went to split about 200 million years ago, these little cracks formed as the rift sort of started opening up between the continents. And into these cracks flowed lava, these sort of giant lava pools that were like, really, really, I think it was like 800 feet deep, these lava lakes. And these cracks were forming all the way up and down, I think from North Carolina all the way up past New England, trying to split the continents apart. And that was happening right here in our little valley. But our Rift Valley sort of stopped spreading apart and it was aborted. The real Rift Valley won. It was the Atlantic Ocean east of Boston. But so we had this layer of sort of cooled lava. And then on top of that, some more sediments fell from these old mountains and then some more lava. So we have these different layers that then got tilted and then got eroded. And as it just turns out that the basalt is more erosion resistant than the sandstone. And so that's why this mountain range stood up. And now we have this crack between these two layers of rock. So it's a complicated story, but all this to say is right here, this crack between two layers of rock, and basalt gives a lot of magnesium to the soils, which makes for really rich soils. And it just so happens that rich and moist tend to be associated because wetland plants are usually down low where there's lots of nutrients. So you tend to see plants that are associated with both rich and wet at the same time. But in this case, it's not the moisture preferences that's driving these plant patterns. It's the preference for rich. See how these are all rich loving plants and these are sort of dry or poor loving or acidic loving plants. So the rocks are sort of flipping that usual relationship between the dry slope because of the sun and the sort of the rich slope because of the basalt. So there's a story there that the plants are telling from the rocks, and it's really telling the story of when Africa and North America split up 200 million years ago. And that story is sort of like the basis for the whole valley that we move throughout in our course and in the book. It's what forms this valley. And as you move from place to place, you see different stories that you see patterns that could be driven by land use or wetlands or fires, rivers moving around, a lot of different things where you look at a landscape, you see a pattern, and then you have to sort of decode like what's going on there. And it's a lot of work. You don't walk into a place and just suddenly know what it is. You look at your backyard or whatever it is, and it takes some time, it takes some digging, it takes some asking questions and getting to know the place. So, there are these processes that underlie everything. You look at the pattern and you look at the pieces, and together these things all help you sort of tell the story of the landscape from the bedrock up through the sort of superficial deposits, and look at topography and the context of what's around it and the disturbance history. So I'll just sort of walk you through sort of theoretically kind of like how you think about a landscape with you have a bunch of rock layers that get tilted and they get eroded, and that creates the differential erosion rates create different shape of the landscape, and that sort of tells you why there are hills and valleys in certain places. The river network comes along and sort of eats away and creates a drainage network from the water sort of flowing over eons across the landscape. Up in the north, you get glaciers dumping sediment all over things, and in fact that fills up those drainage networks so that you get a lot of pools. You get a lot of vernal pools up in the north. That's why I study vernal pools up here. They're mainly around glacial till and these places where the glaciers mucked up the drainage networks that the water has been working on. and that those superficial deposits also sort of mask a lot of those bedrock patterns like I just showed you. So you have like the bedrock, you've got the superficial geology, and then down in Florida, which I don't know much about, but I was just I've been there a few times, and I was looking, and there's a lot of stories that you're sort of similar. You have the different parts of the bedrock, and you've got the changes in the coastline. These are the sorts of processes that are going to drive the landscapes down there. Up in Maine, we think about our marine limit 10,000 years ago. Everything where I am right now was underwater, way inland in Maine, and so you see these marine deposits. So thinking about those sort of the bedrock underneath, and then the more recent superficial deposits, you think about where you are if you have topography relative to the water table. The further you are up on a hill, the further you're going to be from the water table. So wetland things like to be down low where you're closer to the water table, or even trees up here at the very top, chestnut oaks and things that can have really deep roots or withstand dry conditions are going to be different from the trees very slightly down the slope. We talked a little bit about the direction of the sun. In some cases, you'll see really clear patterns of evergreen forest on the north side and hardwood forest on the south side in the parts of the world where these two forests intersect, just because of the drying capacity of the sunlight. When you look at the disturbance history more recently, there's a lot of clues you can look at in forests. Typically oaks and most hardwood species, they'll grow a single trunk up, but if you cut it down, then it'll split into two sort of stems that become new trunks of their own. So you often see a logging event from 100 years ago from when these trees used to stand there, and then they got cut down. The forest was allowed to regrow, and now they're big trees again, but the centers of them are the size of that old tree that once stood there. You can also look at I talked a little bit about forest succession, and you can see in forests, often if you look at the difference between the understory forest and understory species and the canopy species, that tells you, like with the hemlocks, that the forest is still undergoing change, and you can sort of read that. And in some old forests, you get into this old growth state where you have canopy trees like beeches that sort of, in theory, in a climax system are kind of like always, though they come up under themselves, and so the beech understory and the beech canopy are the same, and it's a self-replacing forest. But even in those systems, you see other species, like this is a tulip poplar, which is an early successional species, just like the white pine, in this old growth forest. And the way that happens is you have individual trees that fall as part of an old growth forest. It's a natural process, and it's important because in this case, frogs are breeding in there. That log and the stump sort of decays into this mound. And these mounds are really important places for regeneration of trees. And into this spot is where a tulip poplar would grow. So this is that tulip poplar, early successional forest tree that's really in an old growth forest because it has this one gap in the canopy where it found its foothold and grew on an ancient, see how the roots are they used to grow on an old mound there. That's why they're spread out kind of like an octopus roots. There was an old mound there 100, 200 years ago. So these small scale disturbances in the forest. And you can think about, invasive species like this honeysuckle that's moving into this forest because it was disturbed not too long ago, and it makes for early successional forests have more light penetration, so you have more potential for invasive species. They're also, when you're near a seed source of yards around you that have lots of invasives, you can see that there is honeysuckle that creeps in like around here from the edges and turns it all green. Because honeysuckle holds its leaves longer in the winter, so you can actually from the satellite see it creeping in, honeysuckle and privet. Whereas deep in the interior of this forest, there's not a lot of invasive. So the disturbance context around you tells you what's going to happen in your forest. And edges, tend to be more invasives, more predators, drier, all sorts of things that sort of make it not as good a habitat for interior forest birds and salamanders and things. And that effect is more true down in the tropics. But is somewhat true even up in New England too. So on top of all these sort of processes, we layer on top of this the values. Like, how do we feel about this landscape? How do we feel about the bobcats and the invasives and all these things? And it really, conservation biology is a value-laden science. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong. It's sort of what we want to do about it, how we connect with it, and what we feel we want out of this forest. And do we value these sort of fallen over trees? Or do we see them as messy, or do we see them as an important part of the habitat for salamanders and woodpeckers and all the things that live in the forest? So, you know, when we get to see a forest or a landscape and we get to know it more, my hope is that we will, you know, decision makers will be more able to sort of make good decisions, and we will be better stewards of our landscapes and the species, and we'll be making decisions not from what I call sort of like the forest of drywall here, but more from experience within the real forest and understanding that perspective. So, you know, I'm going to end with just one short reading from my book here. And it's a chapter where I'm I've got Juno on my back, and we're walking up the hill to that first sort of valley where the basalt and conglomerate meet. And we're walking up the hill there. But we decide, you know, we're on a trail, and sort of a hot summer morning, we decide to step off the trail, because following the trail is the easiest way to be lost. Sure, that trail might take us to a preordained destination faster, but we'll have no idea where we are when we get there. While we're on the trail, we lose track of what's around us and where we are in space. We are lost. We put our trust in the trail, ceding responsibility. We give up our awareness, our senses, our minds. Our interface with the landscape boils down to just two numbers: the total length of the trail and the distance we've traveled. Staring at the path a few feet in front of us, we are not fully engaged with the surrounding world. But step off that path, and suddenly we have to look up, look at the shape of the land and decide how steeply we want to climb. Look at the trees in the distance and pick a target to walk toward. Keep looking behind so that we'll recognize the forest when we encounter it from the other direction on our return trip. Study the shrub layer for gaps to duck through. Follow the occasional animal trails worn through the denser areas. Use the network of deer paths when traversing steep slopes to gain level footing. Keep an eye out for poison ivy, rose thorns, and ticks waving their arms in hopes of catching a ride. Study the patterns of light for clearings. Monitor the changing habitats near and far. White tops of sycamores in the distance signaling a creek, chestnut oaks nearby telling us we've reached the drier hilltops. The banjo-like of a lone green frog calling from the wetland ahead that we hope to steer around. Keep an eye on the rising sun and remember where south is as we walk. This whole time, we maintain a map of the landscape in our heads, filling in the details as we go. That is how we get to know the world and our place in it. So with that, I'll end and take any questions or whatever you want to talk about. So let me stop sharing. There we go.
Very cool. Somebody anonymous is asking, what do you consider invasive? Are invasives always bad?
Well, it's a loaded question. There's no, I mean, you know, different answers I could give to that. You know, from a sort of scientific perspective, there isn't like a bad and good. There's a what we want with a landscape. Well, and I will say that non-native species, as I've said, they support fewer bugs, less biodiversity. In general, when you have more natives, you have less sort of local diversity compared to and you sort of homogenize all the world if we have all the same species everywhere. There's a lot of reasons that natives are sort of better from our values around what species we like to protect. Now, that said, if you have a landscape like the orchard or somewhere where like the option of not invasive is just like a yard that's just a bunch of other non-natives that like has even less biodiversity. In that case, you know, a tangle of multiflora rose like might be sort of supporting more wildlife species than like a flat lawn. And that lawn is going to be all non-native species anyway. So there's sort of different tiers of like, what are we trying to do with a landscape and what is the alternative to that particular species there. So I'm in general, like I like natives. I think they're really useful and really important to keep them around. And we have to recognize that the truth is we live in a world where there's no pristine place in nature left on Earth. Humans and nature are inextricably linked, and invasives are kind of everywhere, and we can't really eliminate the spread of these species completely. We can manage them and think about the places we want to have more or less of them, and what places are what we want to do with them. If we're just trying to mitigate for some sort of ecosystem services, we might find that a non-native thing could be really useful in a spot. But yeah.
Somebody comments, seems like humans might be considered invasive, lots of laughs.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll stay
And
up.
Monica Geyer says, do you have a feel for the change in natural watersheds versus man-made changes in water directions and holdings?
Wait, I'm trying to unpack.
Yeah, me too. Do you have a feel for the change in natural watersheds versus man-made changes in water directions and holdings?
I'm not exactly sure where we're going with that, but I will say that like certainly people have a long history of not liking where water wants to go and trying to change its path and sort of channelizing, making, turning a nice complicated river system into something that's lined with concrete and goes straight past their house, or like trying to keep it a wall up to keep water from moving into it. And in general, that is sort of bad for all the species I try to protect and like. It simplifies the world, and the complexity of those riverine networks creates habitat for lots of species that I value. And I think about the Oregon chub as a species where channelization up in Oregon made this species federally listed. They did a lot of work to restore those river networks, and now it's sort of doing better now. And there's a lot of other dams. I'm in this wildlife department where there's a lot of work about removing dams and providing passage for alewife and shad and other things, salmon, so they can get back up to their historic breeding grounds back and forth. So there's a lot we've done to mess up river networks and the way water wants to move that is not good for things that like to use the water.
We have a conservation foundation of the Gulf Coast here in Central Florida, and one of their major focuses or foci is really on restoring the natural waterways and taking away the blocked fields and berms and anything that stops the natural flow of the watersheds.
Yeah. Yeah, we can often, look at a map, and every time you see like a straight river around here, you're like, that used to meander. And sometimes you can still find like where that meander was, and there's still like kind of wetland trees there. Like that water wants to be over there. And so, yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question. When you were talking about Nashville and shutting off a public road, I apologize. There were a lot of interruptions, and you had this block show up on your screen, which had nothing to do with you, I think. But when they made it, I guess they turned it over to private owners. Did that mean they shut off I thought, well, maybe that was good because then amphibians could cross the road. I didn't quite understand. Or was that just?
So it was a dead end road that a lot of people would access to view wildlife, right? It's just one of these, and it never got a lot of traffic, right? It just got a lot of pedestrians going there and bird watching essentially, or people looking at nature and enjoying turtles like I did. It became a private road, and so you can't go there anymore. So that's essentially, it's, they are developing some of the roads, they put in some houses around it that have changed things a little bit. But mainly it was one of these cases where we had this public space for people to go out and enjoy bird watching and stuff, and the city didn't value that. They didn't see any reason to hold land that didn't have a sort of function, and they just gave it away. So.
And they could have, for example, made it into a park, a dead end road with a park.
It already was a de facto park. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah.
They don't value it, and it wasn't valued in that way. And it wasn't like there was no need to give it away, other than the neighbors just didn't want people bird watching nearby. So.
I'd like to ask a question about what are the role of beavers in a landscape, and do you have them in? I mean, how many do you have in Maine? Are they? Some people consider them as pests, of course. They don't like them, but the wonderful book we just read, Beaverland, just really is they're important.
Yeah, the beavers, you know, they were eradicated from New England and reintroduced for the purpose of, you know, restoring our wildlife and restoring our native landscapes. They are really important for maintaining diversity. They, you know, they create this patchwork on the landscape when you let them do their thing, where you'll have a whole network of sort of old beaver meadows and new ones and going up the stream. And so you have habitat for different birds and salamanders that all kind of depend on that. Historically, before people were making lots of dams, that was sort of the only place for a lot of these species to live. They do sort of modify the forest around their dams to sort of selectively cut certain species. But they're very rich, biodiverse hotspots on the landscape where there are beavers. If you don't have any beavers on a landscape, it tends to be just a lot more uniform and you just have less diversity. I think they're really cool. I went inside a beaver lodge once. It was one of the coolest things I'd ever done. I definitely recognize that people and beavers and people like butt heads a lot and get into conflict, perhaps because they're so similar. And they both want to do the same things and occupy the same spaces. And you know, there's a lot of work around, you know, the people, I don't know if you have like beaver deceivers, which is what we have around here, where you, as a way to like keep them from flooding the roads, but so they put these big cages and these tunnels that so that the beavers can still live there, but they don't actually flood out the property as much. But certainly people still get angry. And it is, you know, it's a lot of regulations around moving beaver dams because you're moving wetlands and wetlands are protected in a lot of ways. So.
Good,
I
thank
wish
you.
I could say they were protected in Florida. Our particular counties right now think that wetlands aren't important, although they're phenomenally protective against hurricanes. But
yeah,
development seems to have the upper hand right now.
Yeah.
We need your sensitivities into all of our developers who are going the wrong way with our counties. Any
Yeah.
more questions before we close?
I would like you to come to Florida and read our landscape right here in Sarasota
Yes,
County.
that would be awesome. Maybe we could do a workshop in Myakka State Park or something where we would.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that would be a lot of fun. I will say that, you know, I'm not sure I'd be any better at it than any of you because like so much of it is like knowing your place and the history there and getting to know a landscape. And like I would walk into it being like, I don't know. But like I know kinds of questions you would ask and like I have a little bit of, but I think you might be better better suited to actually read that landscape than I would. But
we could learn together.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well,
All right, I'm gonna share the screen again because we did have someone to ask that tuned in late and didn't see the how to purchase the book. So here you go. I hope you're
And-
still on.
Please be very, very, very aware that you have to buy it through Yale University Press in order to get this very good discount. You can't get it through Amazon.
Right.
Yeah, and they have a phone number and a website. I think you probably shared with them, but yeah.
I shared your website because everything was right there and it was the easiest one to type. But yeah,
there's a, if you go to that website, I think it has a click.
It has a click for Yale. That's the first click.
Yeah,
So, yep.
Yeah, no, I appreciate folks buying it, sharing it with each other, and putting positive reviews online. Anything you do, it's all really helpful to me.
And just for everybody's information, this book got just fabulous reviews. Like Bill McKibben says, a book for the shelf of any forest wanderer and a book to take on those wanders so you can much better understand what you are seeing. There's so many really good reviews. So many good reviews. This is very highly acclaimed. So I can't recommend this book enough.
Well, I've started it. It's really fun. It makes you think and then answers your questions.
yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and buy it right when we get off screen. So, great.
So,
Thank
any
you so
more
much. Yeah.
All right. So next month, thank you for putting that up there. Tammy and Dave McQuaid will be talking about birding Central America, and I updated with them about 2 weeks ago. And we brainstormed more specifically, they asked me where should they talk about birding in Central America, and I said, well, what do you like the best? And we all agreed that they should be talking about Costa Rica.
Okay.
And
Lovely.
I do want to say, and Tammy and Dave McQuaid speak with us every year. And this is a little bit off topic, but their young son is facing some severe health issues right now. So please send Patrick, Tammy, and Dave McQuaid your well wishes for him completely recovering, because I think this might affect their ability not only to take care of their family, but to be available to speak to us next month. And they're such loyal speakers to us. And if you don't know, they're both very devoted to the ABA, the American Birding Association, and to supporting all of our birding efforts in Florida. So, but
Another great program. We've had
Costa Rica.
wonderful program after wonderful program all year long.
Yes.
And yours, Noah, was
Thanks,
right
Margie.
up there.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that.
All right, so I think that's it, right? We're good?
Yeah, we good. Thanks a lot. Keep warm up there.
Go out and buy a
Thank you very
book.
much, Noah. Noah's still on, or is he left? Thank you
Yeah.
so much, everybody.
That was great.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
No,
all.
you had a big turnout. You had 76 people.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
excellent. Very good.
right.
Okay.
Good night.
Take care. Good night.
Thanks
Good
so much.
night.